Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Gimel, Daf 33 of Masechta Sukkah. Friends, Daf 33, man, it's a Gewalt. Daf 33 is a Geschmack Daf. Some real sugyas over here. So, the Daf begins sort of wrapping up our discussion, of course, from yesterday with Hadassim and kind of the leaf formations. And then we start discussing when there are berries on hadassim and, kind of removing berries, but also when, making hadassim kosher. And we get into the sugya of Dichuy mitzvos, right? The concept of a mitzvah getting pushed off and can it get fixed again. It's kind of a real sugya over there. So we're going to get into the sugya of, is it possible for a mitzvah to get pushed off and then fixed? We'll have to go into that in a little bit more detail. And then, we get into sort of removing berries from hadassim in order to make them kosher, which berries would be okay, which berries would not be okay. We bring up the sugya of psik reisha v'lo yamus, Masechta Shabbos Sukkah, davar she'einu miskavein mamish. A lot of interesting sugyas over here on Daf Lamed Gimel of Masechta Sukkah. Let us jump in. We're going to start 4 lines from the bottom of Lamed Beis. Lamed Beis, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Nashurov Olav, if most of the leaves of the hadas fell off, v'nishtaribo miut kosher, and a minority of the leaves remain, it's a kosher hadas. Uvavachte avusu kayemes, as long as the braids are still there. Now, what this means is, or at least the way Rashi understands it, is that, okay, a hadas, imagine your hadas, right? So, as we said, there's like braids, and it starts from the bottom of the branch all the way up to the top of the branch, and the branch is covered with leaves, right? Now, one way for the majority of the leaves to fall off would be like if, let's say, from the bottom of the branch, all the leaves start falling off, and the branch is like, there's no leaves on it for most of it, and then from, let's say, once 3/4 of the way up, all of a sudden there's like leaves. That's one way, right? It's like bare for most of it, and then there's leaves for the rest of it. But what this is talking about is actually, as we said, that that throughout the hadas, there's like 3 leaves coming from one place, and that's like its braids. So what it means is that the majority of the leaves fell off, so that there's actually leaves going up the entirety of the length of the hadas, right? The branch has leaves all, going the entire length of it. However, where there are supposed to be 3 leaves coming out of one place, there's only 1, right? 2 out of 3 fell off, there's only 1 left. So, right? So says the Gemara again, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Noshu of Olav, if 2 out of 3 of the leaves fell off from each sort of row and layer of the leaves of the Hadassim, v'nishtari bo miut, and only a minority of the leaves remain, kosher, nonetheless, the hadas is kosher, as long as the braiding is still there. Now, obviously, the question is, how would it be possible for the braiding to be there if the braiding is the 3 leaves coming out of the one place? That's what the braid is. Now we're saying 2 out of 3 left off. You basically just have 2 out of 3 fell off. You basically just have 1 leaf left. That's not a braid. As long as the braid is intact, this doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory. Amart Nashru of Olav kosher. First, you said that if the majority of the leaves fall off, it's a kosher hadas, meaning if 2 out of 3 leaves on each layer fall off, it's a kosher hadas. But then you say, but the braid has to still be intact. The braid is the 3 leaves. If you're only left with 1 leaf, you don't have a braid, that's just 1 leaf. Imagine like a challah, right? You take the 3 things of dough and you crisscross them, that's how you have a braid. You can't make a braid with 1 thing of dough, right? Right. So, Kevan denasilu trey ovis heichim mishkachasla. So once, Kevan denasilu trey ovis heichim mishkachasla. Once 2 leaves fall off, how could you have the braiding? Amar Abaye mishkachasla ba'as mitzvah. Says Abaye, have you ever heard of what's called an asa mitzvah? Rashi gives 2 explanations for it. That could be either it means like a meitzar, which is like a fence, like a hadas that grows on the fence, not in the middle of the field, and there's plenty of space for it to expand or whatever, and it can kind of grow very well there. Okay, fine. Or it means like an Egyptian hadas. Okay. The kaim is shiva b'chad kina, that this hadas, that this asa mitzvah has 7 leaves. for each layer. So meaning, whereas we've been talking up until now that a hadas has 3 leaves coming out on each layer. So Abai says there's actually this interesting thing called a asa mitzvah, which has 7 leaves coming out of each thing. And therefore, even if the majority falls off, i.e. 4 out of 7, you're still left with 3, which is the braid that we need. So that when 4 of the leaves fall off, you still have 3 left, and that is your braid, and it'll still be a kosher hadas. So that's what it means, that if the majority of the leaves fall off, it's still kosher as long as there's still a braid over there. Meaning, for example, in asa mitzvah, where even if the majority of the leaves fall off, you still have 3 leaves coming out of each, right, on each layer. Omer Abaye had kizak shmamina. We learn from here, hay asa mitzvah kosher lo shaina. So we see clearly that an asa mitzvah is a kosher hadas for your lulav. From the fact that we're saying that asa mitzvah is this example of this hadas, that even if the leaves fall off, it's still kosher, right? So clearly it's a kosher hadas. Pshita, the Gemara says, obviously, what's the problem? Well, I may have thought to say, well, since it's not just a regular hadas, it's a hadas mitzvah. Maybe a hadas mitzvah isn't a regular hadas, and maybe it's not the hadasim that we're talking about. So kamashmalan, that no, asa mitzvah is also acceptable as a hadas, and it's fine. The Gemara says, wait, no, maybe I'll say that taka actually a hadas mitzvah and asa mitzvah is not a good hadas. You need a hadas, a regular hadas, not a hadas mitzvah. It's avosam rachmana mikol malkum, to which the Gemara says, no, the pasuk isn't too picky. It says, right, it's obvious, I guess, as long as it's woven, as long as it's braided, it's fine. Egyptian, fence, not Egyptian, really makes no difference. It'll be fine. Tanu Rabbanan the rabbis taught Yavshur of olive and Sharibo Shlosha Bade Alin Lachin kosher. The rabbis taught that if the majority of the leaves of the hadas fell off, but there's like 3 rows remaining, there's like 3 layers of perfect braids, kosher. V'amrav Chizda of Rosh Kol Echad V'Echad says of Chizda, but those 3 layers of braids would have to be at the top of the hadas. All right, sounds very nice, right? Why not? Niktam Rosho. Okay, moving on to the sugya of Niktam Rosho. If you have a hadas and the top of the hadas gets clipped off, so we said it's no good because it's not hadar, it's not beautiful, it's not zakeh limanveu. Tani Ula Bar Chinana. So Ula Bar Chinana teaches Niktam Rosho. Okay, so what if the top of the hadas gets clipped off? So now it's not hadar, it's not beautiful, so you can't use it. However, also about tomorrow, but some kind of date-like fruit grows on top of it. Now it's beautiful. Kosher. So now it's kosher. So we had talked in the Mishnah about these berries, right? Anovav, mubav, mubus, me'olav. We had talked about like berries. Apparently also on a hadas, some kind of date-like fruit can grow as well. Okay? So it says, Ula bar Chinana, that if the top of the hadas is clipped off, and it's possible. However, in its place grows this kind of date-like fruit, now it's kosher. By Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to know the following question. Friends, you ready for this? Niktam Rosha me'erev Yom Tif. What if on Erev Yom Tif, the top of the hadas gets clipped off? Which means, then when Yom Tif starts, it's a pasul hadas. However, the also tomorrow be Yom Tif. But on Yom Tif, do you hear this? Change of events. This date-like fruit grows on the hadas on Yom Tif. Mahu. Now it's the halacha. Aha, chevre. You like this question? It's a shmaka kasha, right? It's like a real lamdish kasha. When Yom Tif started, it was a pasul hadas, but on Yom Tif, this date-like thing grows on it. Now, technically speaking, if a hadas gets clipped, but this tamara grows on it, it's kosher. But what about the fact that technically, when Yom Tiv started, it was still pasul. Now, on Yom Tiv, this date grows. Can that, does the fact that when Yom Tiv came in, it was pasul, does that mean that it's forever pasul? There's no way of fixing it, because when Yom Tiv started, it was a pasul hadas, and therefore it remains pasul? Or do we say that no, even though when Yom Tiv started, it was pasul, but on Yom Tiv it can get fixed? Yesh dichuy etzel mitzvos. Do we say that there's a concept of dichuy, of getting pushed off when it comes to mitzvahs or not? Meaning, do we say that since when Yom Tov started, this hadas was pasul, so it's pushed off? Forget about this hadas. It's a has-been, it's done. There's no fixing it now. Or do we say, no, there's no dichuy by mitzvos. It doesn't just get pushed off. When Yom Tov started, even though it was a pasul hadas, that doesn't matter. It can still get fixed. The date grows on it, givaldi. Now you can use it, even if that happens on Yom Tov. It doesn't matter. So let's try to answer it. So that was Rabbi Yirmiyah's kasha, right? If the date grows on it on Yom Tov, can it now become kosher? Do we say dichuy, in which case the answer is no? Or do we say ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs, in which case it would be a kosher hadas? So let's try to answer from the following Mishnah. The Tanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, kisov and izgale patur milachasos. Okay. When it comes to kisui adam, who can tell me what kisui adam is? When you slaughter a chaya or a oaf, when you slaughter a bird or a undomesticated animal. So undomesticated animal like a deer, a bird like a chicken. So there's a mitzvah of kisui adam. You have to cover up the blood with dirt. So kisovin is gale, if you covered up the blood with dirt, and then it became revealed again. I don't know, wind blew, whatever it is. The blood became revealed. Patur milachasas, you're patur. You already did the mitzvah, it became revealed, you're done. You did what you needed to do. Kiso aruach, chayev l'chasos. If the wind covers the blood, you have to do kisui adam, right? So you have the blood on the floor, you just slaughtered like a chicken, there's blood on the floor, and then the wind blows and covers the blood with dirt. So we say chayev l'chasos, you still need to cover the blood. Va'omer Rabbi Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan, and it says Rabbi Bar Chana, the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Loshanu ela shechozer v'nisgale. When we say that if the wind blew dirt over the blood, you have to still do kisui adam, that's only if it then got revealed once again. But if it never got revealed again, then you don't have to cover it, right? Meaning, so if you slaughtered the chicken, there's blood on the floor, the wind blows, the blood gets covered with dirt, and it remains that way. It never gets, uncovered again, so you're done. There's nothing you have to do. If it gets uncovered, so then you have to do kisui hadam. You have to do it yourself. And we ask, and we ask, 1 second, when the blood gets revealed again, right? Meaning the blood was on the floor, the wind blew and covered it. And we're saying that in that case, you don't have to do kisui adam anymore because the wind covered it. But we're saying if it got revealed now, if it got uncovered, you now have to cover it again with dirt. Why? If we're saying that once the wind blows and covers the blood, you're done, you don't need to do anything. If it remains covered, you don't have to do anything. Well then, even when it becomes uncovered, you shouldn't have to do anything. Because if we're saying that once the wind blows and covers it, you don't need to do anything, that means that your obligation is done. It got pushed off. The obligation to do kisui adam is waived, essentially, because the wind blew it for you. So therefore, when it becomes uncovered, why are we saying that in that case I have to cover it myself? Shouldn't we say that since it got pushed off, since my obligation to do kisui adam got waived when the wind covered it, it's waived permanently? And therefore, even when it becomes uncovered, I should not have to cover it myself? V'amar Rav Papa, and says Rav Papa, also meris. So what does this seem to be saying? Ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs. So clearly, there's no concept of dichuy by mitzvahs. There's no concept of when a mitzvah gets waived, it gets waived permanently. And therefore, even though when the wind covers the blood, okay, so I don't have to do kisui adam, the wind covered it. But if it becomes uncovered, well, now I'm going to have to do it because I never did it myself. So it got temporarily waived, sure, but if it becomes uncovered, so you're going to have to do it yourself. So, ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs. That when it comes to mitzvahs, just because something gets pushed off, it can come back again. Just like we see by the kisui adam, if it becomes uncovered, you have to now do it yourself, since it was the wind that covered it initially. And therefore, when it comes to the hadas, what we'll say is ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs. And therefore, even though when Yom Tov started, the hadas was pasul because the top was clipped off, but when the date then grows on it, it's now kosher again. Ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs. When Yom Tov started, it was pushed off. You were unable to use the hadas, but it's not permanent. If a date grows on it on Yom Tif, it now becomes usable again. Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos. So Rabbi Yirmiyah wanted to know, what happens on Yom Tif when the date grows on it? Can you now use it? So we want to say, well, let's say that when it comes to Kisui Adam, Rav Papa says, Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos. So that must be a global rule. Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos. And therefore, this hados, that the date grows on it on Yom Tif, should be a kosher hados. Wow. Chever. It's geschmack, right? Come on. Of course it is. And for the Gemara, the Rav Papa Gufa mibayale. The Gemara says, no, this is exactly what Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to know. This is exactly what Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking. Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking, Mifshat pashit le den dichuy etzel mitzvos lo shna lekula v'lo shna lechumra. What Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking is that when Rav Papa says, although Rabbi Yirmiyah was older than Rav Papa, so he's probably not saying, based on Rav Papa, what he's saying is Davka, this limud, when it comes to Kisui Adam, that when it comes to Kisui Adam, we say Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, and that when it becomes uncovered, you have to recover it, because the obligation to do Kisui Adam was not permanently waived when the wind blows and covers it. Do we say that that's a global rule? That just like by Kisui Adam, Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, so we'll say that everywhere, regardless of if it's going to lead to a stringency or a leniency? Because after all, when it comes to Kisui Adam, that's a stringency. By Kisui Adam, we're saying Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, that mitzvahs don't get pushed off permanently and don't get waived permanently, which means that when the blood becomes uncovered, now you have to go and cover it yourself. That's stringent. We're saying that you have to do an extra activity. Now, if we say Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos when it comes to hados, that's a leniency, because that means that we're saying that this hados is now a kosher hados because Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, which is a leniency. So do we say, so what Rabbi Yirmiyah wants to know is that based on this Mishnah regarding Kisui Adam, yes, we're saying Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, but is that a global rule? Again, Mipshit Pashile, is it obvious, I guess to this Tana, at least in this Mishnah, the Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, that we say Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, lo shna lekula v'lo shna lechumra, regardless of if that's going to lead to a stringency like by Kisui Adam or a leniency like by hados. Or Dilma, or perhaps sapuke misapkale, or maybe the Tana by Kisui Adam actually isn't sure what the halacha is when it comes to Dichuy. Lechumra amrinan, lekula lo amrinan, and therefore we say it to be stringent, but maybe not to be lenient. And therefore when it comes to Kisui Adam, we'll say Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos, and therefore we cannot assume that when the wind covers the blood, the mitzvah to do Kisui Adam is waived forever, and therefore when it becomes uncovered, you have to cover it yourself, which is more stringent. But maybe he's not sure, and therefore when it would come to a hados, and it would say, can you use this hados that when Yom Tov started was pasul, but then the date grew on it? So can we say Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos there also and say that, well, it was never pushed off permanently, and now that the date grew on it, it's kosher. So can we be lenient to say Ein Dichuy etzel mitzvos? Or maybe we just don't know, and therefore we should have to be stringent in both cases and say that by the hados, it's a pasul hados, since when Yom Tov started, it was a pasul hados. Even though the date grows on it, we can't use it because we have to be concerned maybe the halacha is yesh dichuy etzel mitzvos, and this hados was pushed off permanently. And therefore maybe the Tana just doesn't know what the halacha is by dichuy, and therefore by Kisui Adam we're stringent to say that you should recover the blood. And by hados maybe we should be stringent to say that you're not allowed to use it, since when Yom Tov started it was pasul. So, teku. Umar says, Lamaisa, we don't know. Often teku kashas are like, kind of like very theoretical. This is a real lamdish kasha. And we said, and that's what Rabbi Yirmiyah wanted to know, and we don't give an answer. At least not for now. I feel like later on in today's daf, maybe we can imply that there might be an answer. Oh, so the saga continues. Lema kitanoi, let's say that this kasha of do we say that there's dichuy by mitzvahs or not, let's say that it's a machlokas tanoim. Of a velikton pasul divrei Belazar b'Reb Tzadok, our Mishnah had said that if you have a hados and there's too many berries on it, remove the berries, no problem. But don't remove them on Yom Tov. Don't remove them on Yom Tov. Before Yom Tov, if you have too many berries in your hadas, remove them, and then that's fine. You'll prepare the hadas for Yom Tov. But once Yom Tov starts, do not remove the berries. What happens if you did remove the berries? So, of a relikton, if you remove the berries even though you weren't supposed to, possible, the Reb Elazar Reb Tzadok says that you can't do that on Yom Tov. And if you do, it's possible. The hadas remains possible. The Chacham machshir. Chachamim say that by removing the berries, even on Yom Tov, it becomes a kosher hadas. So we say, okay, let's try to explain this machlokas by saying either that lulav does not require binding together the lulav, the hadasim, and the rabbis. Okay, so there's no like asiyah, there's no making required by the lulav. And even if you want to say that a lulav does require eged, so there's an asiyah, however, so we don't learn out lulav from sukkah where it says taisav lumina also, as we learned about this sugya the other day, right? That when it comes to a sukkah, you have to make it in a kosher way. You can't just use something that was already made in a psul. And if we say that we apply it to lulav, so then by tying it together, that's the asiyah. And then if you tied it together when the hadas was pasul, so then even when you remove the berries after the fact, it's not going to fix it because taisav lumina also. Forget about all these sugyas. Forget about these sugyas. Either lulav lo tzarich eged, either you don't require tying when it comes to lulav, so there is no asiyah b'chlal. And even if you say lulav tzarich eged, we don't learn out lulav from sukkah, so also there's no requirement that it taisav lumina also. Okay, don't worry about taisav lumina also, the Gemara is basically saying. Let's say that the machlokas between Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok and the Chacham is basically this. That Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok, who says that if you remove the berries from the hadas on Yom Tov, it remains pasul, because he says yesh dichuy etzel mitzvos, that there is the concept of being pushed off of dichuy by mitzvos, and therefore when Yom Tov started and the hadas was pasul, removing the berries is not going to help. And the Chacham will say that if you remove the berries on Yom Tov, even though you're not supposed to, it's a kosher hadas. They hold that ein dichuy etzel mitzvos, that there's no concept of being pushed off by mitzvos, and therefore, even though when Yom Tov started, the hadas had too many berries on it and it was pasul, but by removing them on Yom Tov, it fixes it, because ein dichuy etzel mitzvos, there's no concept of being pushed off by mitzvahs. So the Gemara wants to say that this concept of yesh dichuy etzel mitzvahs or ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs is machlokas tanoim. Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok says yesh dichuy etzel mitzvahs, and the Chachamim say ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs. Lo. The Gemara says no. No, the machlokas is about something else. Everyone agrees. Both Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok and the Chachamim agree. Lo aminu dichuy etzel mitzvahs. We don't say that mitzvahs get pushed off. We don't. So if that's the case, why does Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok say that the hadas is pasul, even if you remove the berries on Yom Tov? Here they're arguing about, do you learn out lulav from sukkah? Meaning the assumption being that both Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok and the Chacham hold lulav tzarich eged, that you have to tie up the lulav. And therefore the kasha is, so once you tied up the lulav already before Yom Tov, and you did an asiyah, and when you made the hoshaina, when you tied together the lulav, the hadasim are pasul, and then later on Yom Tov, you're going to be removing the berries. So it's a kasha of taisav lo mina asui. Ma'asav yafina lulav misukah. So Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok says, look, we learn out lulav from sukkah. Ma'asav lo yafina lulav misukah. And the rabbi said we don't learn out lulav from sukkah, and therefore Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok says we learn out lulav from sukkah, just like sukkah taisav lo mina asui, also by lulav, right? Just like by sukkah taisav lo mina asui, also by lulav taisav lo mina asui. And therefore, since when you tied together the lulav hadasim and the ravos to make the hoshaina, so the hadasim were pasul. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok says simply removing the berries from the hadas is not going to help, because you have to make it in a kosher way, and this was made in a pasul way. Whereas the Chacham say we don't learn out lulav from sukkah, and therefore, even though by sukkah there's taisav lo mina asui, by lulav there isn't. And therefore what? And therefore, even though when you tied together the hoshaina, the hadasim were pasul, but by removing the berries, they become kosher. Or if you want to say, Or we could say that no, if both Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok, and the Chacham were to in fact hold that you have to tie together the Hoshaina, so then everyone would agree that if that's the case, we would learn out lulav from sukkah, and we would say taisa v'lo min asui, and you would not be allowed to remove the berries to fix it on Yom Tov. However, here the machlokas is actually about, do you have to tie together the lulav, the dasim, and the ravis? That Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok says, yes, you do, and therefore taisa v'lo min asui, and therefore you cannot just remove the berries on Yom Tov. Whereas the Chacham say, lulav einu tzarich eged, that you don't have to tie together the lulav, the adasim, and the aravos, and therefore there's no asiyah, and therefore when Yom Tov comes, so we say right, ein dichuy etzel mitzvos, and therefore, and you don't have to tie it into a hoshaina, you don't have to lulav einu tzarich eged, and therefore Yom Tov came, there were berries on the thing, you removed the berries on Yom Tov, you fixed it, ein dichuy etzel mitzvos. There is no eged, there's no taisa v'lo min asui, no problem. We plugged the Dani Tanoi. It's like the following machlokas Tanoim that we've seen before. The Tanis, we learned in the Brayso, lulav bein agud ben sheinu agud kosher, that a lulav, whether it is tied together, whether it is not tied together, kosher. That's the opinion of the Chacham. Rabbi Yehuda Omer agud kosher sheinu agud pasul. Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be tied together. Lulav tzarich eged according to Rabbi Yehuda. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. How come Rabbi Yehuda says this? Because he learns out of Gzeir Shava. It says lekicha by lekachtem lochem by Rishon by lulav. It says lekicha by lekachtem lochem agudas ezov, lekachtem agudas ezov by the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim. So right, ksivacha lekachtem lochem by Rishon uksivhasum lekachtem agudas ezov. Malahalan aguda afkan aguda. Just like by Pesach Mitzrayim, you needed a bundle of hyssop, so here also you need a bundle for your lulav, you have to tie it together. The rabbis don't have the tradition of that Gezeira Shava, and therefore they don't learn out that lulav tzarich eged. Mantana la Tanu Rabbanan, who's the author of the following brisa that we've seen before, lulav mitzvah la ogdo, that really you should tie together your lulav vim lo ogdo kosher, but if you didn't tie together, it's nonetheless kosher. Money, I don't understand, who is it? Rabbi Yehuda kilo ogdo on my kosher. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, when you didn't tie it together, why is it kosher? Lulav tzarich eged. Rabbanan, my mitzvah kavid. And if it's the rabbis, why is it saying that it's a mitzvah to tie together the Hoshaina? They say that lulav einu tzarich eged. So, and for the Gemara, the Olam Rabbanon mitzvah mishum zeh kelim maveu, and for the Gemara, that really it is the opinion of the rabbis, this brisa, that it says that it's a mitzvah to tie together the Hoshaina. And if you didn't do it, it's nonetheless kosher, because it's a mitzvah because of zeh kelim maveu. It's not a chiyuv, but there's a general principle when it comes to mitzvahs that you want to do mitzvahs as beautiful as possible, and therefore tying together the lulav, adasim, and the ravos, so that's going to make the mitzvah more beautiful, tying them into a bundle. So therefore you should do it, but if you didn't do it, it's nonetheless kosher. Okay, so we say that this machlokas regarding removing the berries on Yom Tif has nothing to do with yesh dichuy etzel mitzvahs or not. We say everyone agrees ein dichuy etzel mitzvahs. Really the machlokas there is about lulav tzarich eged or not. Okay, very, very, very nice. Okay, let's go weiter in Shas. The Mishnah had said that if there are more berries than there are leaves, then it's a pasul hadas. Rav Chizde says, Rav Chizde davar zeh Rabbeinu Agadol amaru v'amakom yeh be'ezo. Says Rav Chizde that the following statement was said by Rabbeinu Agadol, the great Rabbeinu. That's Rav. May God help him. Givaldig. I guess Rav Chizda must have overlapped with Rav, which is pretty gishmak. Rav Chizda, I believe, was a student of Rav Huna, is my understanding. No, Rav Chizda was definitely a student of Rav Huna. Rav Huna was a student of Rav, but I guess that Rav Chizda was still alive during Rav's lifetime, or at least maybe Rav was older at that point. But it says Rav Chizda that the following statement was made by Rabbeinu Agadol, which is Rav. May God help him. Lo shanu ela b'makom echad, aval b'shnayim or shloshim makomos kosher, says Rav, that when we say that if there's more berries than there are leaves on the hadas, so it's a pasul hadas, that's only if all these berries are concentrated in one area. But if they're spread out into 2 or 3 areas, so then it'll be a kosher hadas, even though there's technically more berries than leaves. Amar Rava says, Shnayim v'shloshim makomos have menumer ufasul. Rava says, one second, this doesn't make sense. If you have more berries than leaves and they're scattered in different places, 2-3 places, that's like a leopard, a spotted hados. And that's no good. You don't want a spotted hados. It's not hadar. So therefore it'll be possible. Rather, if you're going to state Rav Chizda, you have to state Rav Chizda in the following way. When the Mishnah says that the Mishnah says that if there are more berries than there are leaves, it's possible. Rav Chizda says, the following statement was made by Rav, may God help him. Says Rav that when we say that if there are more berries than there are leaves, it's a pasul hadas. That's only if the berries are black. However, if the berries are green, gesundheit, as many berries as you want, because it's just part of the hadas. It's the same color as the hadas. It's part of the hadas. It's a healthy hadas, and it is kosher. But if the leaves are black, so then it's a pasul hadas, no matter if they're concentrated in one place, no matter if they're scattered in a few places, pasul. If there's a majority of black berries, pasul. Amr Pape, adumis kishchoris damyan, says Rav Pape, and red berries are basically the same as black berries. They're going to be pasul if there is a majority. Amr Chanina, haydam shachar adamu ela shalaka, says Rav Chanina in the context of damnida that black blood is basically just red blood that like congealed or whatever, that became black. And therefore, we're going to apply the same thing by berries, which is that a red berry, blackberries and red berries are basically the same, that a blackberry, I guess any red berry is ultimately going to turn black when it gets dried out. So, blackberries, red berries, pasul hadas if it's the majority, if there are more than the leaves, but if they're green, then it's going to be a kosher hadas. Givaldig. Givaldig. Chavre, now we're going to get back to the sugya of Dichuy. What a geschmack sugya. I don't know. Are you guys enjoying? There's something very geschmack about this concept of Dichuy. Maybe because it's like not too hard. Maybe that's what it is. It feels like shtickle lumdus. You can like get into it, back and forth a shtickle, without it being like too difficult and like drive you crazy kind of difficult. I think that's what's nice about it. It's just like a nice, simple, one day geschmack limud. I think. Can anybody confirm or deny that? Let's go weiter. Maybe I just assumed that here on Babylon Talmud we're like on the same wavelength, and maybe that's it. Maybe people who like to listen to Babylon Talmud, they like the things that I like. Maybe. All right, let's go weiter. Probably not. Let's go weiter. Imiatan kosher. So if we said if you reduce the berries, so then the thing becomes kosher. Timatinu emas. No, when are you doing this? So our Mishnah said, no, what did our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah said, look, if there are more berries than there are leaves, it's a pasul hadas, but you could fix it. Just remove the berries and then it's fine. So now the Gemara wants to know, Timatinu emas. When did you remove the berries? Ilema mikame to the agde pshita. So if we were removing the berries before you tied up the Hoshaina, well, obviously it's kosher. Meaning, why shouldn't it be kosher? Right? The only reason to say that it's not kosher would be to say it's some kind of form of like dichuy or something. It's a pasul hadas, you can't fix it. But at what point does it become a pasul hadas? Right? Meaning if it's before you tied it into anything and before Yom Tif, what makes it pasul? Pasul is relative. Right? Right now it's what? Right now we're in Chodesh Av, I think. If I have a hadas right now in Chodesh Av, is it a pasul hadas? It's not sukkahs. In order for something to be kosher or pasul, there has to be like some context in which it's kosher or pasul. And therefore, if you haven't even tied the hadas into the lulav yet, and it's not Yom Tif, so what makes it pasul that I should no longer be able to fix it? So therefore, right, it says the Gemara, if we're saying that you remove the berries before you even tied it into a hoshaina, so obviously it's a kosher hadas. What should make it pasul? Okay, so if we say that it's after you tied it into the hadas, into the Hoshaina, right? So you take a hadas. The hadas has too many berries. You now tie it into the Hoshaina. And if we're saying that you could still remove the berries even after it's tied into the Hoshaina, so Dichuy meikaru. Well, one second, but when you put it into the Hoshaina, it was no good. It was right. It had too many berries. So that means that here we're seeing for the first time a nafkamina between at what point was it pasul. Here is what's called dichuy meikara. It was pasul from the outset, meaning at the time that you put the hadas into the lulav, into the eged, into the bundle, it was already pasul. And we're saying that you can remove the berries. So tifshot mina, so should we therefore infer from there, dichuy meikar lo ave dichuy? That pushing off from the outset is not really considered having been pushed off, right? And if we're saying that, so again, if we say that you're removing the berries before you even put it in a bundle b'chlal, obviously that should be acceptable. And if we're saying that you can remove the berries even after you put it into the bundle, even though when you put it into the bundle, it was no good because there were too many berries. So we're saying the fact that when you put it into the bundle, it was no good doesn't invalidate it forever. You could still just remove the berries. That implies that dichuy meikara lo ave dichuy. That something that was pushed off from the outset is not pushed off forever. The olam basa the agdev kusave eged azmana ba'alma hu ba'azmana ba'alma lo klumu, to which the Gemara says, no, don't get carried away. Really, it's talking about after he puts it into the eged, but remember, we pass like the chachamim, lulav eino tzarich eged. That lulav, you don't have to tie it, and therefore tying it isn't a real thing. So it's not like there's a real actual difference between it before you tied it and after you tied it, right? It's just hazmana ba'alma. Tying it together is just, right, as the chacham said, because it's zekel maveu, to make it look beautiful, so it's better to tie it together. So we tie it together, but there's not really, it's not like once you tie it together, at that point, already it's too late, you can't fix it. No, there's no. When Yom Tov starts, that'll be a big game changer, because at that point, when Yom Tov started, was it kosher or pasul? But just because you tied it into a Hoshaina doesn't actually make any difference. And what we're saying is that if you remove the berries on Erev Yom Tov, it's a kosher hadas. So meaning if you remove the berries before you tie it into the Hoshaina, obviously it's going to be a kosher hadas. There's no reason to assume that it shouldn't be. But what we're saying is that even though you remove the berries only after you put it into the Hoshaina and you tied it into the Hoshaina, nonetheless, we're saying that it's still acceptable since it's before Yom Tov, because tying it into the Hoshaina it's just azmana ba'alma. It's just a preparation, but it's not like it's not a mitzvah. It's not like a real, like a siyah or anything like that. You could still remove it, but there's no nafkaminas in terms of dichuy, because dichuy would only be like once Yom Tov starts. If the hadas was kosher or pasul, once Yom Tov started, was the hadas kosher or pasul, and can you fix that? But over here, it's before Yom Tov. The fact that you put it into Hoshaina doesn't really matter, because lulav eino tzarich eged. Tying into Hoshaina is just like, kind of just some kind of preparation, but nothing like significant in terms of like dichuy, is it pushed off or not? And therefore, there's no nafkaminas over here regarding dichuy. Now, the Mishnah had said that we do not remove the berries on Yom Tov, right? So we said that if there are too many berries, you could remove them, but don't remove them on Yom Tov. However, v'likton mai kosher. But what if you did? The Gemara wants to assume it's kosher. The Gemara wants to assume that so we don't remove the berries on Yom Tov, but if you did, it would be kosher. The ashcha emas. You ready for this, friends? We go a shtickle deeper now. At what point did the berries become black, right? We had said earlier, green berries are fine. Black berries are where it gets problematic. At what point did the berries become black? Chaver, you hear this? If the berries became black before Sukkah started, from Erev Yom Tov, which means that when Yom Tov started, the berries were already black, i.e. when Yom Tov started, the hadas was already pasul, so that would be what's called dichuy meikara. That it was already pasul from the outset. When Yom Tov started, there were already too many black berries on it, and it's pasul from the outset. Tifshot mina dichuy meikara lo ave dichuy. So therefore, should we imply from there that when something is pushed off from the outset, it's not really considered pushed off forever. And therefore, we're saying that if you do reduce the berries on Yom Tov, it's kosher. Because Dichuy me'ikara, something that's pushed off from the outset, is not really considered Dichuy. Elab the ashra b'Yom Tov. So Gemara suggests that no. Maybe it's talking about the berries became black on Yom Tov, which means that when Yom Tov started, the hadas was still kosher because the berries were green. Then on Yom Tov, they became black and they became pasul. And we're saying that if you remove them, it's kosher. Nir v'nidchehu, that would be a case of what's called nir v'nidche, that it was kosher and then it became pushed off. It was kosher when Yom Tov started, and then it became pasul when the berries became black, which means what's called nira v'nidche. It was fit, it was kosher, and then it became pushed off. Shmas mina nira v'nidche chozav v'nira, which is a bigger chiddush, right? That we should infer from there that something that was actually fit and then got pushed off can now become fit once again, right? We're saying that when Yom Tov started, the hadas was kosher because the berries were green. The berries then became black, which made them pasul, and then you remove the black berries, and now they become kosher again. Again, we said you shouldn't do it on Yom Tov, but if you did, it's kosher, which is what's called nira v'nidche chozav v'nira, which would mean that something that was fit, then became pushed off, can once again become fit again. And that's a bigger chiddush. Because as Rashi points out, it's kind of like basically, to say that something that's dichuy me'ikara is kosher, that's okay. It's kind of like a korban which was like less than 8 days old, and now it becomes 8 days old. So initially you couldn't use it, and now it's 8 days old, now you can use it. So that's like less of a chiddush. But something that was nira v'nidche, something that was already fit, and then became pasul, to say that it can become fit once again, is a bigger chiddush. So the Gemara says no. Olam da ashra me'ikara. No, really, it's talking about where the berries became black before Yom Tov, which means that when Yom Tov started, the berries, the hadas was pasul already, which means that it's a situation of dichuy me'ikara, that it was already pushed off from the outset. Dachuy me'ikara la'avedachuy tivshot mina, which means that we can infer from there that something which is pushed off from the outset is not permanently pushed off. But do not infer from here that something that was fit and then became unfit can once again become fit. That we cannot learn. So what did we just say? So we just wanted to say, so what we want to, sounds like what we want to say right now, is that when it comes to dichuy, that dachuy me'ikar lo shmei dachuy, that something that's pushed off from the outset is not necessarily pushed off forever. And therefore, if when Yom Tov started, the hadas was pasul with the black berries, and then you remove the berries on Yom Tov, even though you shouldn't do it, if you did it, it's nonetheless kosher. So we see dachuy me'ikar lo shmei dachuy. However, nira v'nidche, if when Yom Tov started, the hadas was kosher, then the berries became black, and then you remove the berries, it's not going to make the hadas kosher again, because nira v'nidche eino chozav v'nira. Something that was fit and then became unfit cannot revert to once again being fit. Wow. Okay, sounds like that's what we're saying by dichuy. Very, very interesting. So you see a differentiation, a distinction now between dachuy me'ikara versus nira v'nidche. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught ememaitin b'Yom Tov. So the rabbis taught that we don't remove the berries on Yom Tov. Mishum Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok Amru memaitin. No, Mishum Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Amru memaitin. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says you are allowed to remove the berries on Yom Tov. V'akam masakin mana b'Yom Tov. But you're going to be fixing something on Yom Tov, right? You're not allowed to be masakin mana on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to fix something on Yom Tov. So we're saying don't remove the berries on Yom Tov. How come? Why not? Why can't I remove the berries on Yom Tov? It's not like I'm like picking a fruit from the ground. I mean, these are already separated from the ground. What's wrong with removing the berries from a hadas on Yom Tov? Well, the potential issue is that you're fixing something. Before it was a pasul hadas. You couldn't use it. It was unusable. And now you're fixing it to make it kosher. So the Tanakama says you can't remove the berries because you're fixing something. Masakin mona. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says you can remove the berries. What about the fact that it's masakin mona? Rav Ashi, Rav Ashi says, well, it's talking about where he's removing the berries to eat the berries. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon savar lakavua. And Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon holds like his father. The Reb Shimon says, as we know from Masechta Shabbos, something that's unintentional is mutter. And therefore he's not intending to fix the hadas. He just wants to eat berries. But I thought Abai and Rava both agree that Reb Shimon admits that when it comes to psikreshe v'lo yamus, that when it comes to just saying, look, I just want the head of the chicken, I don't want it to die, we say that's preposterous, because by removing the head of the chicken, obviously you're going to kill the chicken. So Reb Shimon agrees that psikreshe v'lo yamus is a problem. And here also, sure, you might just be claiming that you want to eat the berries, but the fact of the matter is, it's misakin mana, it's fixing the hadas. The Gemara says, yeah, but here, a very interesting answer. Here, it's talking about where he has a different hadas, and therefore he doesn't need this hadas for Yom Tif. He has already hadasim. He literally just wants to eat these berries from this hadas, and it says, Reb Elazar Reb Shimon, there's no reason to say that he shouldn't be allowed to eat hadas berries on Yom Tif, just because technically speaking, now you can use it for Oshaina. He already has his hadasim for Oshainas. Here he just wants to eat hadas berries. And that would be acceptable. Who are we to ban hadas berries on Yom Tov? As long as you already have a different hadas for your Oshaina, you can eat the hadas berries. Alright, sounds very nice. If the eged came out on Yom Tov, so you tie it up with like a vegetable knot, which I guess isn't like a proper knot. Why not just tie it in a bow? Well, because this Tana holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that tying in a bow is a proper knot, and therefore you can't tie it in a bow. But if it's Rabbi Yehuda, then how could just doing a vegetable knot work? It's not a real knot. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, you need like a lulav tzarich eged. You have to do a proper knot, not just a vegetable knot. So this Tana holds like Rabbi Yehuda with regard to one thing, and not like Rabbi Yehuda with regard to another thing. Meaning, Rabbi Yehuda holds lulav tzarich eged. You have to tie up the lulav, the hadasim, and the ravos into a bundle, and you have to tie it properly. Now, we're saying if the eged comes out on Yom Tif, so you could just tie it with like a vegetable knot, which I guess isn't a proper knot. So, we're saying, I don't understand. If we're saying that you have to lulav tzarich eged, so then you have to, I'm sorry. So the Gemara says, why don't you just tie it with a bow, right, rather than this, right, which is a proper, a better knot than a vegetable knot. So he said, well, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you're not allowed to tie bows on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So he says, I don't understand. If it's Rabbi Yehuda, so then lulav tzarich eged, and therefore you have to tie it properly, and this vegetable thing isn't going to work. If it's not Rabbi Yehuda, so then why can't you tie it in a bow? Because it's only Rabbi Yehuda who says you're not allowed to tie it in a bow. But if we're not holding like Rabbi Yehuda, so then why not tie it in a bow? So we say, well, this Tana holds like Rabbi Yehuda regarding bow tying, and therefore you can't tie it in a bow, but he holds like the Chacham when it comes to lulav tzarich eged, say lulav eino tzarich eged, therefore you don't need to do a proper knot, and the vegetable tie is enough. Chaved, that was Daf Lamed Gimel of Masechta Sukkah. Oh my goodness gracious. There was a lot. Like each sugya on this page, you can like mamish go deep over here. Anyways, so the first part of the daf, we finished up our discussion about the leaves of the hadasim. We said that, okay, in the special case of like the hadas mitzvah, that, with 7 leaves, if 4 of them fall off and you still have 3 left, it's beseder. We also said that if all the leaves of the hadas fell off, but there's 3 rows of braided hadasim at the top, that's also acceptable. Now, then we got to the interesting shaila of, right, so we said, look, of niktam rosho by the hadas, if the top of the hadas is clipped off, we say that's a problem because it's not hadar. However, if a date grows on top of it, now it becomes kosher again. I guess it's hadar. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, what if that date grows into the onto the hadas on Yom Tif, right? Which means that when Yom Tif started, it was a pasul hadas, and then it becomes kosher on Yom Tif. And the kasha is, do we say dichuy? Do we say that once something is pushed off, it's pushed off forever, or not? So we wanted to bring an answer from Kisoy Adam, that we say that when it comes to Kisoy Adam, if the wind blows it, if it then becomes uncovered again, you have to cover it yourself. So therefore, it sounds like from over there we say ein dichuy by mitzvos, in which case, when it comes to the hadas, it should be a kosher hadas. Because who cares that when Yom Tov started, it was a pasul hadas. Now that the date grows on it, it becomes kosher. So the Gemara says, well, actually we're not sure. Maybe we're just actually being machmir, that when it comes to Kisoy Adam, we say ein dichuy, because that would mean that you would have to recover it yourself, which is more stringent. But maybe when it comes to the hadas, we'll say that yesh dichuy, right? Maybe we'll have to be stringent and say that that the hadas is possible, because when Yom Tov started it was possible, in which case you can't use it even when the date grows on it. We said we don't have an answer. We're not sure, if we say Dichuy, if we don't say Dichuy. Then we wanted to try to bring a proof from the fact that we say that there's a machlokas between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok, and the Chachamim when it comes to if you remove the berries from a hadas on Yom Tov. Now, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok says it's possible. The Chachamim say it's still kosher. And we want to say that that's a machlokas of, do we say Dichuy or not? Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok would say, yes, there is Dichuy when it comes to mitzvahs, and therefore, even if you remove the berries from the hadas, it remains possible. Whereas the Chachamim say, there's no Dichuy, and therefore you could remove the berries from the hadas on Yom Tov. To which you say, no, that's not the machlokas. Everyone agrees, ain't Dichuy when it comes to mitzvahs, just that it's actually machlokas about eged or not. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Tzadok says lulav tzarich eged, and therefore, if you use a pasul hadas, it's taisef and also, and it's a problem. The Chachamim say lulav doesn't require an eged, and therefore there's no reason why you should be prevented from removing the berries on Yom Tov. And if you remove the berries on Yom Tov, it's going to be kosher. Fine. Now we did a discussion about the berries of a hadas. Ultimately, we said that if the berries are green, so then the hadas is kosher, but if the berries are red or black, so then the hadas is going to be pasul if there are more berries than there are leaves, regardless of if they are in one place or scattered. We then came to an interesting distinction when it comes to Dichuy, right? The question being, what if the berries of the hadas became black on Yom Tov, which means that when Yom Tov started it was a kosher hadas, but then on Yom Tov the berries became black, making it pasul. And we came up with an interesting distinction when it comes to Dichuy to say that when Yom Tov starts, the berries were already black. That's what's called Dichuy meikara, or Dachui meikara, that there's Dichuy already from the outset. And in that case, that can be fixed. And if you remove the berries, it'll be kosher. However, the situation of when Yom Tov started, it was a kosher hadas, and then it became pasul, then that's already going to be what's called nira v'nidche, that it was kosher and then became pasul. In that case, eino chose v'nire, it cannot go back and become kosher again. So we see the distinction between Dachui meikara, which is fixable, or at least sounds like the Gemara is saying it's fixable, whereas nira v'nidche, eino chose v'nire, if it was fit and then became problematic, it cannot go back and become kosher once again. We saw machlokas between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the Tanakama about what happens if you remove the berries on Yom Tov. According to Tanakama, not what happens, but are you allowed to remove the berries on Yom Tov? So according to the Tanakama, yes, you can. No, you cannot remove the berries on Yom Tov. According to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, you can use the berries on Yom Tov. What about the fact that you're fixing something? So it's talking about where he has a different hadas already, and therefore in that case, he's not really concerned about misakin mana. He's just picking the berries for eating, and it's beseder. Then we saw this opinion at the very end that if the eged comes out on Yom Tov, so you can just use like a vegetable tie, which is not a very good tie on Yom Tov, and we say that's because the Tana holds lulav does not require eged, therefore you can just use this kind of weak kind of knot. But at the same time, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to tying in a bow, that a bow would be considered a proper knot, and therefore you cannot tie it in a bow, you just have to use this very weak, like vegetable kind of knot. That was Daf Lamed Gimel of Masechta Sukkah. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Cheers.